We're now live on YouTube. This is the November 12th, 2018 meeting of the node.js and JS Foundation joint Bootstrap team meeting. We're joined by 7 different members today, including representatives of the JS Foundation, Node Foundation, and Linux Foundation. We have a full agenda, so we'll jump right into it. First issue that we have on the, before we dig in, is anyone able to help with taking notes?
I can do that. This is Brian.
Okay, excellent. I'm dropping the doc link into the chat. And everyone who's on the call, if you can please sign your name into the roll call so we have attendance documented. First issue that we have right now is number 23, which is to draft the staging process. We have a 3-minute time box for discussion on this. This is a pull request from Jory Burson, who joins us today. It is approved currently by 5 different people. If we get down to the bottom here, there are a couple grammatical nits in there right now, but other than that, there are no objections. Jory, do you have anything to add regarding this pull request right now? Jory, if you're talking, you're currently muted.
I can unmute her. There, let's see if that works.
Thank you. Hi. So just from I think it's simple enough that we can change it if we feel like there's too many steps. I think it captures the core concerns, which are getting the ideas down, providing a space to understand all of the different variables that might affect decision-making on that particular proposal, and then also making sure that there's a handoff process at the end so that the responsible party is identified and everybody's aware of the next steps. And so that's it.
So with that being said, do we have any objections to moving forward and landing this process, assuming the last few grammatical nits here are sorted out? Okay, excellent. So we'll move forward. I'll take care of getting that landed. Thanks, everyone. So the next one that we have on here is a request for stage advancement. This is issue number 32. We have a 3-minute time box for this discussion. This PR is built on top of number 23. It's taking my governance proposal, which had been up till now a stage 0 proposal, and moving it to be a stage 1 proposal. Adam, you had put a comment in here in the template. That template is part of the other issue that we were just talking about. It just happened to be that this PR is rebased on top of it. Does anyone object to moving the governance proposal to stage 1? To clarify, stage 1 means that we have an idea of the general shape of how we're doing it. We just don't have complete consensus on the exact wording of it yet.
No objection.
Okay, excellent. So we can move forward. I'll take care of landing that one as well. To those taking notes right now, if you could please keep it not using the indentation that gets automatically done.
You got it, Miles. Sorry.
Cool. No worries. Cool. So the next one that we have is a 2-minute time box for an update on progress for the first pass at Bootstrap process. This is number 7. I believe that this is Adam's. Adam, can you tell us where you're at on that?
Yeah, like I left in the comment there, most if not all of what was in this initial proposal, which has happened a long time ago, has been captured elsewhere. I've left a couple comments scattered throughout. The 2 largest areas where there's missing content were on Tracy's expectations of the foundation, which left a comment in that PR, and Tracy, happy to help flesh that out with the content from the original one, or from this PR that we're discussing right now. And also just that one comment on a couple missing sections on the review, the staging proposal, which I've left comments in both PR 32 and now PR 20, whatever the other staging proposal PR number is. So I'm happy with this being closed. I have no strong ties to it if we think that there's nothing else that should be pulled out.
Okay. The only thing that I would point out that you had in this first draft of a Bootstrap process that I don't think exists anywhere else was like that you had like a good fleshed out content for the README.
I'm sorry, Miles, you broke up there for a second. What? I have a good fleshed out.
You had fleshed out the README, if I recall. Maybe that has been rebased out since.
Yeah, I think a good chunk of that README was also present in your first pass. Like the bulk of the content was present in your first pass at governance as well.
Yeah,
it's mostly duplicate content.
But I had put in a comment that like everything above operations, I thought was still useful because the README essentially right now has nothing in it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll open a new PR on just the current README with just that README file in there as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
No worries.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I just have a quick question for Adam. Now, was this the issue that captured all of the kind of output of the meetings at JS Interactive, or is this one was separate from that?
There's, I believe in, let me just triple check. I think in the first, the first meeting notes captures all the content from JS Interactive. This is a link to it, but it's the October 13th meeting notes also has all that content as well. And I was, there's a chunk of this that is focused around foundation expectations, which Tracy has another PR out for, which we should use that to capture all that. But the content does live elsewhere. So. Okay,
I just want to make sure that we're tying the thread between the output of all of the community work to the documents that we ultimately end up with, and that's something that we can help people follow, so that they see how and where their time was made an impact. And that's the only concern that I have.
Yeah, agreed.
I would say in that foundation doc that you have the vision statement draft and that values. And I think that's like the exact stuff that was taken from those meetings. Like that may make sense to combine into that README pull request that you're going to put together.
Okay, will do.
Yeah, because I do think that there is a lot of good content in here that shouldn't just be left. And I don't think that just having the notes from Interactive in a meeting note is kind of like sufficiently documenting them in the repo.
Yeah, I like a lot of that foundation expectations that came from that meeting, because that was mostly what emerged from the JS Interactive meeting was foundation expectations. There's in again Tracy's PR, which I think we're discussing a little later about foundation expectations. I've linked directly to that file where there's a lot of that captured. We should work I want to work together with Tracy to integrate that into the foundation expectations PR, and hopefully actually have that go through the stage proposal process to actually get pulled into the repo.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the next one. So, and just as a kind of follow-up on action item, Adam, you're going to close that and recapture the important information from that in a new PR updating the README?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. The next one that we have to discuss is issue number 6, create expectations for foundation draft. Tracy, that's yours. Would you like to lead the discussion?
Sure. So went back through this because we've got this is still, again, supposed to be a high level, but it was due arguably at the end of November. The problem being that it's kind of a big thing. Because essentially this is everything that's the hopes and requirements for the projects going to, into the bylaws. Anything beyond that, we can sort of keep, focused in governance. But there's been a lot of discussions and various pull requests and issues around, what the projects want. How does that get surfaced in these bylaws? What can we push out of the bylaws if possible, so that it doesn't have to be there? Or if there's even just like notes on, in the bylaws that it gets deferred back to these groups, which seems a little silly, but I've seen that happen in bylaws as well. So I'd gone back through with a number of commits, adding in for what people had mentioned. It looked like from discussions that we had some consensus on, but there's some things that I'm still seeing conversations around that I found hard to codify in the list. And I'm also wondering at what point, do I need to put a deadline on this and say we really, not a deadline, but I guess it is a deadline. This is a cutoff date for, hey, we're trying to get feedback in here, but we need to also get some feedback from lawyers and board members just to make sure that our expectations, these expectations can be met just from the legal structures that we have in place. So there's that. So there's the question of deadline, and then also I think one of the big asks is that I was reading, I think Sam Ruby had some good questions around, was the idea of budget. So what I was reading about with some of Sam's comments was how the ASF tends to do things. And a big part of that, I think, which was nice, was that the president is responsible for collecting up and preparing the annual budget, with requests by each of the committee chairs. And then the board is responsible just for ratifying that budget. And now, if you convert that to, or I like to say, if we look at the way that the Node project has been working, in our model, it would have been to say, okay, we require the executive director to go to the chairs of these committees, the projects, and help them build the budget requests and line items, and then help them manage it throughout the year. And I think that is interesting if you do have a person who is paid to be responsible for that, and then walks along with the projects, because I do think that the chairs have a lot on their shoulders already, but it does make sense. There has to be responsibility on the project side, but there also has to be responsibility from others within the foundation to make that happen. So I'm interested in hearing, whether, I don't know if it's appropriate for us to be making a consensus on that, or if it's pushing back again more to the PR for this discussion, because there's been a few people on it, but I'm a little worried that for how big this PR is, there should be more input, a wider range of input.
With that being said, it may make sense just to land it and iterate as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe try to iterate on it enough for the next meeting that we could try to land something by the next meeting and then just iterate on it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So one thing that strikes me is the connection between that particular chunk of foundation work, the budget, and the roles and responsibilities work that I think Sarah said there had been some work already done on what the expectations of an ED are, what the expectations of chairs and directors are, and that kind of thing. I'm wondering if we can bring that in as well, so we can start to look at the relationship between those things.
Oh, interesting. So pull in, are you referring to the work that we had done prior with getting the expectations from the Node top level committees?
I assume so, yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can pull that doc in too.
Okay.
So Tracy, just really quick, I'm not familiar with this doc because I am still relatively new here. What's the action here?
Yeah. So I guess the action here is that the Joint Strategy Subcommittee of the Node project prior did work in trying to collect the expectations from both the TSC and ComCom on so their points of view on what they expected from the foundation, from the executive group, and from the board. And I think a little bit of the project as well. But there were 2 lists provided as part of that had been spent quite a bit of time on. And I can pull those into this PR and have it sort of whatever's not overlapping.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. I think we can move on to the next section. It's 2 discussion items. The first that we have is just a quick revisit of the how often and when do we meet. We had it for 5 minutes, but I'm going to bump it down to 2 for right now because we're running a little short on time, and I don't think there's a ton to talk about. We can just simply document that there's 9 of us here today, which is a little bit less than what we were seeing with the other meeting time, but it's still like I would just guess. Is there anyone on the call right now who has not been able to make the other meeting times, who this particular meeting time allowed them to attend?
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, this one's actually easier for me as well, although I know it's brutal for West Coast. I think we also maybe need to do, if it's possible, to make it more widely known that there are European and Asia Pacific friendly times now.
Okay, so let's bring this back up again briefly. Anagiri, thank you for mentioning it, and Sak for Pion. So those are collaborators from India and Africa. So, obviously this is helping them. So I think let's revisit in the next meeting and discuss further. I think it's worth, at the very least, doing more introspection into finding the perfect time. For those of you on the call, if you look at issue number 21, there's a spreadsheet that we're trying to keep track of good times in UTC that work for people, so we can better generate times other than just kind of 2 that I picked out of a hat. So yeah, something to look at. The next issue that we're looking at is number 33. This is going to be the meat of our meeting today, and it's about drafting the initial governance for a merged foundation. There is a doc that I will drop into the chat. Those of you, please let us know if you have access to it. You should. If not, Mike Dolan, does anyone object to this document being available publicly?
Are you talking about our notes or the drafting? Sorry.
Yeah, the draft governance thing that I just dropped in the chat.
I mean, is there significant changes to what we have already seen in the past? Is it just updates?
And there was nothing in here previously except for all the slides that we used as part of the announcement.
Yeah.
So at this point, what I did yesterday, though, is I went in and dropped in what I thought everybody was talking about, but I don't, know if this is any consensus at the point of making it public. I don't know. So
I think it's fine to just make it public.
Yeah, I mean, it's from as long as there's not like sensitive information about dollars from sponsors, that sort of thing. I think this is good.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got 2 people on the chat who are saying they don't have access to the document. So I think we can just make it publicly accessible at this point.
All right, let me go change that up.
So while that's being opened up for this section of the meeting, Mike Dolan has prepared this slide deck for us, which I guess maybe it makes sense to screen share. Mike, would you like to screen share and guide the discussion on this one?
I did just update the sharing, so I can screen share it as well. But if those who couldn't get access, if you can do a refresh and see if that worked. Okay, thank you. All right, let me go find screen sharing and get that going. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. None of this has changed really in the first 3 slides. The only thing I wasn't sure about, Miles, is there had been a thread about calling this the CTC instead of the Cross Project Council. So I wasn't sure what the
Yeah, I can add to that, and maybe people can chime in right now whether or not they're into this. So historically, the Node Foundation at one point had a had a core technical council, the CTC, that reported to the TSC. So I just thought it would be, like kind of a fun in-cheek thing to call this new top-level council the CTC. And it would mirror the cross community council but if we think projects are going to be more than just TSCs, the original name of a cross project council may make sense. I just thought that could be a nice kind of historical nod.
I wouldn't personally be opposed to it, but it has the potential to maybe imply that there's more technical mandates from the top than some folks might be comfortable with.
I guess
agree.
Go for it.
That implication.
I agree with Adam. I think it unfortunately sends from the outside the perception that there's like technical decisions being made at that level that could be potentially limiting or off-putting to other projects that may want to come in.
Okay, so let's just stick with cross project council then. I'm more than happy with it.
All right, so can we resolve that open comment then, I guess?
Yep.
And I will change it on the polling slides too. Maybe some other cleanups I need to do in order to revert it back. I wasn't sure, so I kind of jumped to cross-technical council. I'll be honest, Miles, I had the exact same reaction as Adam and Jory pointed out, so
Yep.
Not knowing what the conversation had been that led to it. The other one question here, Miles, was around the sandbox, and I see your response here. The sandbox projects would have IP within the foundation. Comments.js would be access to support without having the project within the foundation. I guess, is that the only difference between the two, just from a structural standpoint?
I guess the main structural thing would be that like Sandbox would be a place where projects live, whereas Commons would be like a series of programs and initiatives to support projects. I guess is like a high level way of how I've been thinking about it. But this is extremely flexible, and I'm not like totally married to any of it.
I guess anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I guess maybe it doesn't make sense to work through this governance like from top down again. Does anyone have questions about the structure that we're looking at here or concerns about it?
All right, more questions may come up as we go forward, because I did have slides in here for each of these to understand from a drafting perspective. When we flip this over to the lawyers who are working in the community here, they're going to want to know what are the responsibilities of these different constructs, what are the outputs, or what are their main deliverables, who's participating in them in terms of being on them, and what roles might be in them. And so I've done that for each of these. You'll see board, cross-project council, cross-community council, and just trying to understand, from a drafting perspective, what are sort of the architectural structures that you want to put in place around these is more the idea.
I have a quick question just in looking at the structure again and thinking about what I was working on yesterday with the expectations doc. We, in the expectations doc, had been asking for 3 representatives on the community, from the community. but I only see 2 represented here. So do we have that written somewhere else, or does there need to be an update or an asterisk here?
I guess I'm not maybe I'm not following all the different things going on.
Yeah.
Tracy,
No, I mean, it's not your, yeah, it just occurred to me that
which one are we looking at?
Sorry, if we're just talking about potential structure, because there's board seats mentioned there, I didn't know if there's like a representation slide that's separate from this that talks about board seats, but I just can't, I know we had not, from like the expectations conversations, it's been a lot of like, let's not drill down into the details too much about like what those 3 seats represent for now. Let's just make sure to ask for 3 seats. But just from my experience, that also tends to be a problem. When people go to agree to these things, they don't want like an ambiguous, oh, I'll just have 3 seats that we'll figure out what that means later. Like they're not going to give away precious board seats without.
So I don't know if I got this right, but in the details on each of these, and maybe I should just walk through this first and then we can circle back. But we have one that's the CPC board. We had one I have one in here for the C3 board wrap. And then under top level projects, I had one for the node.js project. At least that's what I was thinking or assuming.
Yeah. So
we had talked about what had been done for, somebody had talked about mirroring what had been done for CNCF for Node.js.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this needs to be a separate issue discussed on its own. It's just like, if we're talking about 3 board seats from the community, we need to nail this down and have very specific conversations.
Yeah, I can give a little. So there's been a lot of different versions of representation proposed, and it would probably be nice to capture all the existing proposals for that into one thread and talk about representation separately from governance structure.
Right.
Yeah, because I've seen what this proposal is proposing, which is 1 seat per top level committee, CPC, CTC. I've seen another version where CPC and C3 have a second seat that activate under a certain number of conditions, like individual membership size or number of projects represented in the CPC.
Yeah.
I've seen a bunch of conversation about top level projects having individual representation. So I think breaking this thread out into its own issue would be helpful.
Yeah, Mike, just for clarity's sake, it's not that I don't think these slides are great and specific, it's that I actually saw a hole in what we've been discussing in the threads, and that because we haven't really settled on something specific yet, it's just missing here. So we need to flush that out.
So I guess I'm not sure I understand what the hole is, Tracy. I don't know if I need to know right now, but
well, because the third. So if we're talking about 3 seats, so I think the conversation has mostly been that C3 gets a seat for sure, Cross Project Council gets a seat for sure, but the 3rd seat is not necessarily the node seat. I think that's the conversation that's still happening, is what happens for that 3rd.
So one thing I can add really quickly to this, from the town hall that we just had at NodeConf EU, this question of representation came up. It was mentioned that the number of community seats in the CNCF was anchored against total number of platinum members. So that was actually like a scaling figure. So, that's also a way that we could consider approaching this, rather than having it locked at 3. I think the CNCF actually might have more than 3. Mike, maybe you can chime in about that.
I'm not sure who said they scale, because that's not what I recall.
It may not have been the CNCF, but it was one of the larger foundations that does exist, that has community reps, does have scaling numbers of community seats based, I believe, on platinum membership.
So CNCF has that. No, I think you're referring to OpenStack did that, and to be honest, I would not suggest that as a guiding structure. I think OpenStack did that, but they've had a number of issues there. I think that with the way CNCF works is they have the TOC chair, 2 committers elected from CNCF projects under an approved process by the governing board. My recollection is the governing board does reserve one of those for the Kubernetes project. So that's how they get to their 3 is the TOC chair and then 2 committers.
And are those all defined in the bylaws, or is it just that there's 3?
Yeah, that's in if you go to the CNCF charter, it's in there.
But that's in the charter, not the bylaws, or is that the equivalent of their bylaws?
That's the equivalent of their bylaws. They're not a separately incorporated entity like here. So I don't know. Can you still see my screen here? It's probably under. Yep. So they have their membership representation here, and then they have their technical community representation here. So it's a TOC chair, 2 committers elected from the projects.
Okay. So one proposal that we did have in the past that I think might be worth re-exploring and seeing if it's something that we could do in the bylaws was essentially having like the 3 community chairs being things that were given to the top level projects and were to on an annual basis be assigned, so that it was like, they were flexible depending on where the need of representation was. Can you imagine any reason, Mike, why that would be a problem, if that would be a problem?
I think are you suggesting that if there's multiple top level projects that each one takes a turn?
No, more so that like the way, just having the bylaws drafted in a way that like we are guaranteed the number of seats, but that the committees on a yearly basis could allocate those seats where they want them to be. That the allocation is not necessarily strictly put in the bylaws. So like, for example, the node.js project is by far the largest project in the foundation as of today, and as such may want a board seat, but in 5 years or something like that, perhaps that is not the case, and we would be able to switch that representation without requiring bylaw changes.
Yeah, would you just make that maybe the C3 decides how the 3rd seat?
Yeah, well, I think the 3rd seat could be decided between the CPC and the CTC. It's the CPC and C3 on an annual basis.
I have a slight concern about this, which is that I'm afraid that doing something swing like this might predispose the process to be more political than it needs to be.
I have the same concern, Jory, to be honest with you.
Yep.
You could do a rotation of the projects, the top level projects or something.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of a fan of the idea of the 3rd seat being more, if the individual membership program exists for the foundation moving forward, the threshold for like if we have a minimum number of members, then we have that 3rd seat.
We could have the 3rd seat openly decided by all the technical steering committees of the projects.
Right. Yeah.
That seems to have the same political issue, though. Also, we'd have to figure out how to make each technical steering committee equal. If it's going to be like there's 20 people on the Node.js and 3 on the ESLint TSC.
How's that different than the cross project council rep?
I don't know.
No, I'm just asking, like, why? How is this what we just proposed? Different than the cross project council rep? Because I just
essentially the individual membership seat proposal that you were referencing is also very similar to that CPC/C3 determined 3rd rep as well. It's just a more formally outlined process for it, which might be what it needs. There were a lot of head nodding to the existing individual membership representation proposal.
What if
back when we were socializing it a bit?
What if we borrowed a little bit from how the W3C does tag elections, where any member of the community can be nominated for this position? They don't need to be associated with a member organization or a project or anything, but just need to be kind of deemed important and expert. Then each organization, each voting group gets exactly one vote via its representatives, so that could be the TSC, the top level TSC chairs get exactly one vote from the pool of nominees.
Yeah, this is exactly what we proposed for the individual membership program moving forward back in the spring, which was anyone can run, but it's chosen by the most engaged like contributors of the project, which tends to be the like TLC folks.
So I think the latest proposal to come out of the individual membership working group, unless something's changed in the past month or so, was that the TSC and ComCom nominate the field of nominees, and the individual membership members are the ones who vote on it. Rather, so inverting that the nomination process, which
yeah, it's tough. It's just tough with the like, yeah. It's tough because I always worry about popularity contests versus,
Yeah, I'll be honest, the popularity contests tend to sway towards an activist who wants to stir the pot a bit more and can rally up a few people, because to be quite frank, a number of these sort of open nomination and elections tend to be decided by a very small minority of people. I think in a number of cases we've had elections where 3 to 9 people decided it, just because everybody else just voted for themselves. So that's the challenge. Usually we like to scope it to a group that is already well engaged in the projects, so that it's not some random person deciding to run, and it's somebody who's been engaged in the project and in the community who's being nominated to run.
Right.
I think that's
why we had the TSC and the ComCom doing the nomination, because that's not going to result in just anybody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me lay out the proposal from the individual membership subgroup as is right now, just so we're on this level set here. The seat would only be activated after individual membership has reached a certain threshold, which the group provided as 2,000 individual members, but we can discuss that exact number. The TSC and ComCom would nominate the field of nominees to vote on, hopefully making it less of a popularity contest. And then the members in the individual membership that have paid for individual membership are the ones voting on who actually gets the representation.
Right, and I think so. My question is, what if you switch those around? So what we're saying is the general vote, like all of the individual thousands of people voting on individuals like nominated is still a popularity contest, versus if like people step up, right, nominate themselves or are nominated, but then the people who are most engaged in the project, who feel the most sense of responsibility and know like the inner working, like what you need to be able to do in order to succeed in these efforts, like can do the homework to elect the person that they think is most.
Right, but if in that case, you could end up with nominations that don't include somebody that the TSC or ComCom would want to vote for, versus the other way, you should only end up with nominations for people that those two groups would be comfortable holding the position.
Oh, from like a trust standpoint, I guess is what you're.
Well, it's that the comment before was trying to avoid some small group, and if that small group ends up choosing the nominees, then you may have the choices that the people who you trust to make the decision may not have a choice that they want to make, right? Whereas if you make it the other way around, hopefully all the choices are good, and then the larger group, hopefully the larger group can choose and have a say on that front.
I guess the flip side to that, Michael, would be that like we're not guaranteed that all of us would think of all of the best candidates. And when it gets to the point of voting, if the voting is only happening through the top level committees, it's not going to be a popularity contest. So I guess both kind of work in their own way. Tierney has
So, I mean, in the example where the TSC and ComCom would vote on the available nominees, that's basically what we've already done. That's very similar to what we've already done, because the people who have contributed to those votes have been from those groups historically. There has been some from...
No, that's not true. Like the majority, that's what, like the numbers were not majoritively contributors who were voting in the elections, like having seen those roles. Like this is just, but just knowing from the practical standpoint, we always had very competent people running, right, for the individual membership director roles, for instance. But it does tend to turn into a popularity contest. And there, you know, as Mike said, like, you know, 8 people voting makes the difference between, which seems very odd. And I know that minimum threshold makes a big difference there too. But I think I mean, we didn't have a lot of engagement from the contributors, even given that they were given free membership.
And I'd like to note that the proposal as is doesn't say how the TSC and ComCom come to their field of nominees. So we can have an open call for self-nominations, which we then prune back to the people that are trusted, or like there's processes we can take to make it more open on the TSC and ComCom side, or C3 and CPC side. That would just not be detailed in the specifics called out here.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a compromise here, because we know what we were doing wasn't working.
Can I suggest that?
Can I suggest there's one other possibility here that I haven't heard anybody speak about yet, but one other possibility is, I forget which project you do this for, but we have a process where, it is actually CNCF. The community directors in CNCF go through a vetting process that also goes through a board vetting, in terms of they have to get at least 50% of the board members to approve their nomination. If 50% of the board members approve their nomination, then they get to go onto the ballot. So you could have an open nomination from the thousands of individual members, the CPC, the C3, anybody on any of those can nominate, but that each of the nominees must be screened by the board and receive a 50% upvote for that person to be on the ballot. In which case, then you can have, I don't know, any one of them, you know, go through and elect. That's another option.
So what happens in the case where the board doesn't know the people?
Then that would probably cause a concern.
I would think that it should be framed in such a way that, like, nomination shouldn't be unreasonably withheld just because they don't know the person, but through the nomination process, there should be some sort of like demonstration of credibility, expertise, engagement, that kind of thing, that invites an opportunity for the board and for those voting to evaluate the candidate. And I think those folks are reasonably equipped to, you know, understand whether a person is for real or not.
Yeah, I think there's like a 30-day window. It's a fairly lengthy process they go through for the nomination vetting. And it's, as Jerry pointed out, you know, there's ample opportunity to get to know or ask around about a nominee. They can also read the bios that each of the nominees provides and learn from that. So there's any number of ways during that time period that they're expected to understand, you know, the nominees and whether they're validly engaged in part of the community.
Yeah, and I don't know. I guess my concern there just lies with the foundation members who are paying to be on the board, you know, at a platinum level usually, basically being able to dictate who can and cannot represent the community. That would be my concern there.
It's just the reason they do it is a check and balance in CNCF. I don't think anybody's been withheld from a nomination because of that. The other opportunity is to use a similar process, but have not the board do the screening, but maybe it's the CPC. I don't know.
I think that's that's getting closer to what was suggested for that individual membership program.
Well, one of the things to consider on this as well, though, like, even if and there is obviously the risk of the optics of the board, you know, kind of blocking things. But the flip side is whoever's coming in is going to have to work with the board. Like if the board doesn't like them, they're not going to be successful in that role. And I think there's something to be said about a vetting process from the board, meaning that the board has skin in the game in the decision. And there's no way that the board later can make any claim that the people coming in are not people that they want to work with or are people that have problems with, because, you know, they've vetted those candidates.
Framing that from a slightly different direction too, Miles, that does mean that the board needs to pay attention to everybody and be well informed about them as well.
And Miles, that is why the CNCF, you know, they do that. They want to know who each of them are. And it's basically seen as, you know, making sure that somebody's of the right caliber as well to sit on a board.
So I'd like to put out that I don't know if this conversation specifically will be resolved in this setting, but it does sound like this group at least has an idea or a hope that this is the direction we want it to head in. So it sounds like we need a separate proposal for how this is going to work, or come up with language for you know, again, unblock the lawyers here, that will leave it loose enough that this is a governance detail that can be finalized later and not necessarily in the bylaws.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest we start with the individual membership programs proposal, since people put a fair amount of effort into that.
Yeah.
And if people want to suggest modifications to that, we go in that direction. The other thing, I'm sorry I came in a bit late, so if this was already covered, but I don't see anything for the Node.js project there. And I'm just wondering, I just wanted to ask in the context of, you know, there has been an indication that there's an expectation or a desire for that.
Right. So I think I think this is why we need to have an issue or PR only for board representation from the project, or from projects, because I think that we need to talk about this and make sure that we're getting a wide enough range, because like I've definitely heard from Node folks that they want a seat on the board, and that conversation is still happening as to why, separate from the CPC and the C3. But also that opens a can of worms of why would Node get a board seat and not others? And we have to figure that out, right? It's like, what is it? Is it a certain size project? Is it like a certain level of engagement? Is it only one and Node is special? You know, like that stuff has to be talked about, and I don't think that it'll get resolved in this meeting.
I'll be honest, we went through the same debate in setting up Cloud Native Computing Foundation. We ended up reserving one of those community seats is for the Kubernetes project.
Okay.
And the rationale there was simply that Kubernetes was a constellation project. It was a project around which a number of other projects revolved and were dependent upon. And so Kubernetes, you know, got to be one of the projects that was represented on the governing board for CNCF. And I do see a very similar parallel with Node.js personally, you know, in terms of all of the activity around this is significant. And so, you know, if I was to make an argument, it would be similar to that, you know, from my perspective. But
okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't think you'll hear opposition from anyone at the Node project at that. Because, I mean, like every project that, as far as I know, every project in the JSF currently uses Node.js to some extent, as does basically any project published to NPM, because it has to publish to NPM. So, you know, I very much think that idea of a constellation project makes sense for us.
But
That
Kieran,
said,
on the other side, as Node's board rep, I would actually push back against that. And I know that not everyone agrees with me, but I actually don't think that Node needs a board seat. I think that if the CPC is set up properly and the C3 are set up properly to do the things we want to do, Node will not need a direct board seat. I think that us separating from those higher level governance bits will actually be better for the project. And like long-term, for the sake of the foundation, with the kind of projects that we would love to see join that could be considered other constellation level projects, I would be concerned that creating a board seat for Node would create a precedent that would actually make it harder for those other projects to join.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I can understand that.
I can understand that, but Miles, I'm not sure you're in the majority in this case.
I recognize that.
So
we may also be able to properly classify what a constellation project is, create that next level beyond just membership, project membership, where you get that constellation project classification and acquire a board seat. Like that's another model here.
Yeah, I would like to talk more about this in another, I think, focused discussion, because I'm actually, I am tentatively on the same page as Miles with this. Just having seen how board seats work from the community representation side and like level of effectiveness, like the community representation is absolutely essential in my book, but specifically from a project, I'm not sure.
So we've got about 4 minutes left on the meeting. I think, we carved out some really good next questions. Tracy, did you want to take the action item to kick off that thread specifically about this representation bit?
Yeah.
And then Mike, can you find out from your end, I guess, how explicit we need to be about the board representation for the bylaws?
So usually we're not very explicit. In fact, if you read the CNCF charter, we left that open-ended, and then the governing board determined, for example, the idea of the constellation project and made that determination in terms of their, we just basically said it was, let me go back to it. It's under a process approved by the then serving governing board. We could do something as generic as that. We just need to know who's going to be making the decision, and that's really all we'd put in there.
Right, but when you write it that way, then you're leaving it in the hands of the board itself to choose how much, and what the representation is, correct?
Yeah, but it could be
charter a group with that responsibility, correct?
Okay.
I think, Mike.
Sorry, Miles. Sorry, Miles. I think we were both talking at the same time. I didn't hear you.
I was just going to say that if the bylaws give the board the ability to assign those seats, the board could then in turn charter a group with that responsibility.
Right, but again, that's up to the board. They don't have to.
Yeah, but I'm just asking if that's an accurate.
You could basically say a seat to be determined by a community seat to be determined by a process approved by the governing board, proposed by the CPC.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very much into that. I think that's not too far from where we started.
All right. It would be good for people to still continue this conversation, though, so that when we get to launching this, we know how that's going to be determined.
Well, I think I agree with Tracy. We need another focused discussion on this, because this still doesn't reflect potentially what a good portion of people have said they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, Michael. That's why I said, we still need to continue that conversation, because if the Node.js community thinks they're going to get a board seat and then they see this, then we're going to cause a lot of consternation. That wasn't.
I do also want to push back a little bit, Michael, that I do recognize that a large number of people from the project have stated that they would want a board seat in a poll that was put together. I think that question was leading in the way that it was framed. And I don't know that represents the project as a whole.
Sure, I've heard similar things, though, from other people in earlier discussions where it wasn't as leading.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can just dismiss that that desire. Nor, we have another example, the CNCF, which we're basing things on fairly heavily, which did the same thing, and I think they probably had good reasons as well. So I agree that you can't just
have other projects of the similar scale that may join them.
I will not. We can get into the specific details. I just think we can't dismiss this without having
a discussion. Absolutely,
solid reasons as to why it doesn't apply in this case. Or and I even I kind of can agree with Tracy in terms of effectiveness. I don't think that even matters, to be honest. I think if there's a strong desire and expectation, it's not solely about how effective the director will be in it's partially, in a transition like this, we need to make sure that we're making people feel heard and that we respect what they're telling us.
Yeah, definitely. I think, Michael, that's like to your point. I think that it's not that we can dismiss this at all, because I think it's clear that we've heard from a number of people that they want that seat. I think it's more about, like, I think Sam had a great question about it to James, which was, what do you actually want out of it? And I think that that's when we have, like, when we really lay out that discussion, because I haven't actually seen someone lay that out clearly. Then we can talk about outcome and like, what do we want, right? Outcome wise from that. And if the only way to get that is through a board seat, then then we make sure to prioritize that. If there's better ways to do that, when we have effective structure and, actual, an executive director and a team of people working with us, then we can do it that way. So,
right. So, I think that that's all true, but I think actually figuring out and implementing what may be an alternative is not going to happen in the time we're talking about. So,
sorry to interrupt, but we've run over time.
Sure.
And Tierney, I know you have your hand up, but I think we'll have to get to it next week. Let's kick off an issue and start chatting about it on GitHub.
Yep, I'll do that.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming today. The final count was 10. I'm going to end the stream.